Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-backed conversation where we talk all things cannabis, products, market analysis through the lens of data. And I'm joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the High Rise.
And today we have a very special guest with Andrea Cabral, Massachusetts CEO of Ascend Wellness. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. It's very, very nice to see you both. It's nice to be here.
Well, thanks for joining. Really excited for the conversation today. Lots to cover. But before we dig in, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Okay. So I'm currently, you said, the Massachusetts CEO of AWH. That means that I'm the CEO for the state of Massachusetts, both the retail and the cultivation arms of AWH. AWH is an MSO, a multi-state operator, vertically integrated in most of our states. In some states, we just have retail. But as you know, it's federally prohibited, so each state sort of has its own little, operation. I came to cannabis after 28 years in government. I was an assistant district attorney for about 16 years. I was then the sheriff of Suffolk County in Massachusetts, that county is Boston, Chelsea, Winthrop, and Revere. I was sheriff. It's an elected position. I was sheriff for 10 years rather. And then I was the executive secretary of public safety in Governor Deval Patrick's cabinet for the last 2 years of his administration, and then came out of that and was appointed to the Cannabis Advisory Board by the Attorney General for the public safety seat, and then got a call from one of the founders of what was then known just as Ascend, asking if I wanted to get into the cannabis industry, and the rest is sort of history.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm so glad to have Andrea on today because I always say that, Poseidon was early investors in Ascend back when it was just Ascend. And I remember the meeting that we had in the Boston area. I think it was out in Waltham, actually, and met you and Frank in person. And I was like, yeah, that's what sealed the deal for the investment in Ascend was Andrea and Frank. Because for me, too, just having been investing in this industry for several years at that point, seeing a person with that kind of a background come into the industry and really take it seriously and lean in on it, I thought was a really interesting kind of inflection point for where we were heading as an industry, because it's not always been something that folks with a background of law enforcement would have leaned in on. But I thought that your perspective was incredibly enlightening and interesting for me to be able to kind of hear more about. So I was happy.
And we're really glad you did invest.
Me too. I don't know. The market's rough, but I'm still excited. I still think it's going to be amazing. And I have to get out to see that Friend Street store in Boston because it opened when I've been not traveling as much.
So how did Ascend find? Was it just a cold call? Were you already working a little bit in cannabis? Like, how did they know to reach out to see if you'd be interested in the position?
Well, Frank Perullo, who's one of the founders of Ascend, was, for my first campaign for sheriff, was my senior political consultant. He was a major part of my campaign for sheriff. I had known Frank since 2004. So it was just sort of interesting. I was looking at different things that I might want to do, post-government service. And I did have some familiarity with the regulations, both as public safety secretary, but because I had been on the Cannabis Advisory Board. And it just seemed like a very interesting new venture to get into what is essentially a brand new industry with the history this particular plant has in this country. Was fascinating to me. And I also understand government. So I understand how the private industry of cannabis, the nexus between that and government, because it's so highly regulated. And I knew it was going to be sort of an interesting, slow rollout because government isn't used to doing something like this.
So one of the things that we'd love to hear more about too is, the Massachusetts market was one of the first of its size in the Northeast to go from having kind of a medical program to shifting into adult use. And now we're watching this trend happen with New Jersey in 22 and New York shortly hopefully thereafter. And actually with Ascend, we have interactions with both of those markets. So would love to hear your perspective and experiences of what it was like to help on that side in terms of the regulatory framework getting opened up and turning this into a commercially viable business in the state of Massachusetts.
Well, Massachusetts is unique for so many reasons. Legalization came about as a result of a ballot question, unlike in a lot of other states where it's actually legislation. So you have a legislature that's really sort of looking at what it is they want to accomplish by legalization. You have all of sort of the back and forth and it going between House and Senate and all of that kind of stuff. It was a ballot question here whose goal really was to make sure that it got legalized. Then it goes to the legislature. It goes through some changes. There's a lot of community pushback because there was a great perception that the legislation was trying to curtail the industry, even in its infancy. But ultimately, they came out with a law. Then they had, like most states, you have to create a state agency to handle all of that licensing. State agencies are sort of the constant in government. It's like they've always existed in some form from the beginning of government. Starting a brand new one that is going to cover the waterfront statewide, that's a very heavy lift. And legislatures are notoriously stingy about how they budget for something, even though they know what a big deal it's going to be. They're notoriously stingy about how they budget for it. And that agency has to make choices about where they put their resources. So the start was sort of slow. People had to get accustomed to the whole licensing process. It's enormously expensive. There's no access to capital, which even though there's great social equity programs, and social equity I think is, a good faith, effort at social equity in Massachusetts in some sort of precedent setting ways. It's the access to capital that actually keeps people out of the market, and we still haven't figured out how to give people access to capital and level that playing field. So, the Massachusetts, it was bumpy. It's evened out a bit, and it's gotten better. But, it's still a challenge for, regular folk, I would say, who don't have immediate access to large amounts of money or investors to get into the business.
Yeah, Massachusetts is kind of looking at some of the numbers. In 2020, did just over 700 million in total sales, but it's grown quite nicely this year. Year to date, so this is late December. I guess through November, total month sales. So this doesn't have December data in it, but it's done more than 1.2 billion, which is some sizable growth. And we talk about this a lot in the on the show here because a lot of industries have slowed down a little bit, and I think Massachusetts stands out quite nicely in that regard. What is driving that? Is that access? Is that stores opening up? Is it the government programs finally catching up? Is it just more consumers coming into the category? Is it all of those things?
I think it's all of those things. I think the Cannabis Control Commission, which is our regulatory agency, has really gotten its feet under it. And so, more places have been licensed. We went from maybe 3 or 4 cultivations in 2019 to we're at 30, something like 32. It's an enormous number that are being licensed. And I also think it was the state getting accustomed to legalized cannabis, getting accustomed to being able simply to walk into a store and have a menu and learn about it, figuring out what you need. And I think some of those numbers that you quoted, I don't want to miss this point, they represent a really wide-ranging demographic. Our customers are 21, which is the minimum age, to people well in their 80s. Really does run the gamut. People realizing what cannabis can do for them, either recreationally or medicinally, gaining a level of comfort, especially when you offer things like home delivery, and we offer that in both the Boston and the Newton store here, that they can access this in a safe way. They can know what they're buying because all the products are tested and everything's on the label. And I think it's sharpening the public's palate around figuring out just what kind of cannabis product is best for them. And I think that is also reflected in the numbers, along with a greater number of stores opening and the sky not falling as a result of cannabis being legalized. So all of the things that a lot of the regulations were drafted based on what people were afraid was going to happen. None of those things have happened. And so you also see an easing of anxiety around that kind of stuff.
Yeah, how do you feel? I was excited to see that delivery is starting to ramp up in Massachusetts. It's been such a embedded part of my experience as a consumer who lives in the state of California, I've had delivery as long as I can almost remember, and we know it's going to be a part of the New Jersey program too, really, and also New York ultimately. But what have you seen in terms of the adoption around that, and what are your thoughts about delivery in the Eastern market?
Well, we definitely live in a delivery-friendly era in this country. People fully expect to be able to order something online and have it delivered within, a certain 2-hour window. And cannabis is certainly no exception. And in fact, there's even, I think, more enthusiasm because even for people who somehow might have some anxiety around going to an actual store, this is literally being brought to you. So if you're knowledgeable enough to go online and order, or enough of an explorer to go out and, kind of figure out what it is that you want, it can come right to your door. I mean, there are prohibitions about where it can be delivered to. There are definitely places that cannabis is not allowed to be delivered to, federal housing, college dormitories, restaurants, things like that. But if you've got a home or an apartment in a town that allows delivery, you can get it delivered. And I think people have embraced it. What we're seeing is a significant embrace of it, and people probably buying more product than they would if they were in the store, because they can figure it out, get it home, try it, So I think delivery is going to be very, very big in Massachusetts.
Yeah, and delivery is something. I'm in Seattle, and we still don't have delivery in Washington State, and it's quite frustrating because it is very much like the way things are done, even beyond cannabis. More and more of us are ordering food on DoorDash and Uber Eats, things like that. So the fact that we still can't get there. Hopefully eventually, when we're talking about market sizing, I mean, Washington State itself, I think the population is a little bit higher than Massachusetts, but the sales are just slightly higher. And it's an older market. I mean, it's been online for 7 years at this point. And for Massachusetts to catch up this quickly, I think just shows that, some of those programs are working. So all that access, maybe delivery could help in these markets. But speaking of delivery, I think, I'm not super close to the social equity kind of program in Massachusetts, but I do believe there is some sort of prioritization that has to do with delivery. Is that accurate?
It is. So the licenses for home delivery for the first, I can't remember now if it's 2 or 3 years, have to go to social equity applicants. So there's sort of a moratorium on non-social equity applicants. And it has been, great for the industry in Massachusetts because it's given people some real opportunity, even with the caveat that access to capital is still, a challenge. Our home delivery company is a company called Trevit, which is an economic empowerment applicant. We've had a relationship with them since when we started the cultivation in Athol, which was back in 2018. And they actually are cited in Athol on the grounds of where our cultivation is. That's where their host community agreement is. And they not only have a retail store of their own, but they have a home delivery license. And so they're doing our deliveries for Newton, and we just were approved to do delivery from the Boston store. So I think they'll be doing the delivery from the Boston store as well. And it really does, it's part of that sort of, rising tide that raises all boats, and it should in cannabis. But I think it has presented some good opportunities, even though it's not that much less expensive to do a home delivery license than it is a retail or a cultivation. It's still, the moratorium, I think, helps.
I remember one of the things that you actually brought to my attention around ways we can think more about equity applicants and also just small businesses around cannabis is doing microloan programs and supporting that way of funding into businesses, even if it doesn't strike as like a venture type business. It's more of just a family business type of a thing or a small business. What are you seeing, or have you had further thoughts on making headway on programs around that? I know in Oakland, they had some like sponsor capital from the bigger licensed companies to do some sponsor work with equity applicants, or maybe even like sharing spaces. There were ways to think about resourcing equity applicants a little bit differently. Have you heard anything further to this end, or have you continued to explore that?
I actually reached out to a nonprofit here called the Boston Impact Initiative, and they actually are a social impact nonprofit. So they have provided capital to entrepreneurs of color in business, but had not gone into the cannabis industry yet. And Boston Impact Initiative is fascinating for a number of reasons. A, because of the good work that they do in providing funding for these businesses, but they also do stuff on the back end, they have a group of non-certified investors who want to invest in these businesses and pool their money together. And they're actually raising money for a fund to help capitalize a business, but also organizing non-certified investors so that they can get into people who would otherwise not be able to be investors can be investors. And we had a lot of conversations, and they were interested in getting into the cannabis space. They're a nonprofit, and they couldn't do it because they're federally designated as a 501c3. But they were incredibly helpful. And then, the CCC, to its credit, particularly led by the chairman of the CCC, has really been trying to explore ways to divert tax revenue into a pool that could be grants or microloan. Not that the state is really does anything around lending money, but some sort of grant opportunity. But that's really why the federal banking bill is in part so important, because right now we've got, a couple of banks, a few credit unions, but, it's not that banks can't take cannabis money. They certainly can. It's that the federal government is going to audit you every 2 days. And they're going to send in, 500 people to audit you, and it's just onerous. They make it onerous to do it. And the banking bill would alleviate that and give people access to commercial banking. But Massachusetts is trying. I will definitely give it credit. It's not as good as the New York statute, which has, that fund is built right in. They have a percentage of that tax money that's going to go for social equity businesses. That would have been great if we had done the statute that way. But we have a very hands-off legislature around cannabis, and they're not particularly active in that regard.
Well, I thought that was a really illuminating point when you brought that up, and that was in that same meeting where I first really met you in person. And it's something that stayed in my thought process as I look at all these programs in every state and just think that there still needs to be consideration of these microloan or grant programs around it, or else it just makes it very, very difficult. So
the playing field remains completely unlevel.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And certainly the blocking of SAFE did not help that, but maybe we'll see some things change in 22, although I'm not holding out a lot on these things anymore. Anyway.
So you mentioned New York legislation and some kind of provisions that they've put in for social equity. Are there other things kind of about New York that we should be getting excited for?
Yeah, New York is really a great example of what happens when you have engaged legislators who see the landscape around cannabis, not just in terms of the tax revenue that it will bring the state or the number of jobs it will bring the state, but providing equal or more equitable access to opportunity to be in the business. And so the majority leader is an assemblywoman by the name of Crystal Peoples-Stokes. She's amazing. I actually had the pleasure of meeting her not too long ago. And she really sort of brought this legislation along. She was a drafter of it, sponsor of it, and her cohort in the Senate is Senator Liz Krueger. But she really, was the guardian angel for the legislation in New York and making sure that it had, I think it's 50%. New York requires 50% of the licenses issued to be issued to social equity applicants. And then there's a fund that is not only designed to provide educational assistance, technical assistance to entrepreneurs who are getting into the business, and also has money in it for drug programs and substance abuse education and things like that. But there's money that is actually designated, a percentage of the tax revenue that they get is designated to be provided as capital. to social equity applicants. It's a pretty comprehensive statute. And granted, New York has learned from all of the other states. Every state essentially learns from the very first states and kind of tailors it around their needs. But it's a unique statute. It's got some remarkable features in it. And I'm very excited to see how it gets rolled out and how well New York manages it, because, it's only as good as the oversight, whether or not anybody's adhering to its provisions.
Yeah, I haven't met Crystal, but had an opportunity to connect with Liz Kruger. She was at the Business of Cannabis in New York, an event in October that I spoke at, and just to kind of hear her stories of shepherding this through, and just, I mean, Andrea, you're obviously closer to government, how government works, but the I think like slog, for lack of a better term, like the amount of years that she had to like push through, and it's seven
Yep.
years, and we're in a world here where there are many legal states, medical and adult use, and it's still such a challenge to get these things through. It's just incredible, and sometimes from my seat, it's kind of hard to imagine kind of the effort that these states go through, the people in the states, the representatives, that the effort that they put in to make these things happen. Because Emily, we've talked about this, where it's gotten to this point where this pace of legalization in new markets has accelerated, where it's almost just like a headline, and it's like, oh yeah, this state just legalized medical, where it used to be we'd be popping the champagne, it would be such a big event, but at the same time, it's just as much effort as it's ever been, I feel like, to get these things lifted up. So, amazing that we're all able to be here and be in this industry, because of people like that continue to push and continue to get this stuff across, and just to kind of hear how engaged they were in New York. And I think that's certainly reflective in the legislation that, that I've seen. And you building on, to your point, Andrea, like building on all these other states, like they've really done it, and they've really done it in interesting ways. And especially there are a lot of, large operators in our industry at this point that have, a lot of influence, yet I feel like New York will have a decent balance, potentially because of the way it's set up with, so many smaller operators, lack of vertical integration. So I think that's just a testament to the legislators and what they were able to do. So really excited to kind of see this roll out, and maybe this is the model, for the future states, because Washington, Colorado has progressed, I think, a little bit, but Washington's been pretty stagnant. It was a big deal when they launched, and I know it was very conservative because they wanted to get it across the line. They thought, like, we can't push too far because it's not going to happen, these first adult use states. But then it's just kind of hasn't really iterated in any significant way. I mean, not to discount Washington and progress that's happened, but it's not like we don't have delivery, we don't have home grow, we don't really have a good social equity program, and you see this stuff coming out of New York. So pretty exciting. I'm really excited to see when these stores open. Do you have any sense of when that might be? Is that looking like next year? I start to hear 2023 now. Is that more likely? What do you think is going to happen?
I mean, I think 2023 is probably realistic. I mean, they now have seated their entire board, their equivalent of what we call the Cannabis Control Commission here. I think they call it the Office of Cannabis Management in New York. So they have a full board seated, but they got to start the process of drafting and promulgating regulations. They'll probably have an advisory board, maybe like we do in Massachusetts, that helps with that. And there'll be public comment and community input, and that's a very long process. So I think, 2023 is probably reasonable. But to your point about, what some states have and don't have, New York was just medical, obviously, before this adult use legislation was signed into law. They couldn't sell flower.
Right.
That was a big part of the adult use statute, was the ability to sell flower. I mean, you just think about what that would mean in any other market that you know of, where you go, we can't sell flower? Like, how is that even possible? But it was all medical. They were all vertically integrated. They were processing their edibles and topicals or whatever. but not flower until recently. So that New York should probably explode, I would think, with the ability to sell flower.
I mean, it's the biggest category still, and
Yeah,
single
40 to
category.
50% of sales are flower, and
Yeah.
not an. But I know with the new adult use that they finally brought it into the medical, and that was a recent headline
Yeah.
where flower is finally available. Yeah, just interesting decisions that get made at certain
Yeah, which
points.
seem to have no base. Like you try to figure out, well, why did somebody think that would be a good idea? And it's real. I have no idea. I just can't figure that one.
No, yeah, it doesn't make
Totally.
any. Well, I mean, that's really interesting. I'm so excited to see what happens next. And then, of course, we have New Jersey opening in the shorter window, which I can't wait for too. So here we go, Northeast. Let's get it done.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'll be spending a fair amount of time out there next year,
Yeah,
just watching these things unfold.
that's right.
So can I ask you guys a question? Because you sort of are so data driven and you really stay on top of this. How many states do you think will have to make it legal before the federal government just can't hold out any longer and has to legalize it?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I think we're at that inflection point. Looking at gay marriage as a kind of a proxy, and obviously they're very different topics and different subjects, but it kind of same trajectory happened. And Massachusetts, I believe, was the first state to legalize, and it was
We like
about
being first at things.
yeah, it's great, it's fantastic,
Because
and
then we can brag about it endlessly and bore the hell out of people. Yes, that's the whole reason. We want to be smug. We're good at smug.
and
San Francisco
so
too. We're gonna do it too.
yeah, and it was San Francisco was pretty early too, right? I think
Yeah.
On both,
probably before
yeah.
California, yeah, and so then I think it was about 18 states, and the federal government was forced. And I mean, we're well beyond that with medical. I think with adult use, we're right there. I think that in 2022, I know this year was a little tough from the federal legislation. We didn't really see much progress, but we saw a lot of conversations happening, and it's getting to that point where people have to stop talking and have to start doing something. So I think next year we'll start to see some of that. I have to believe at this point,
Yeah.
at least like federal banking has got to be fixed at the very least.
I mean, what's important is that the constituents are starting to really be more and more aligned and outspoken on no matter the party affiliation. And I think that we have a pretty old group of people running the country right now and kind of holding on to some outdated belief systems around cannabis, and including, unfortunately, the president I still think has got some misperceptions around cannabis versus opiates and the link to gateway drug paths. But I think that I'm a firm believer that when people can hold space and become more informed, then we can change the conversation. And that's what we've all been doing for these past, for 8 years, I've been trying to do that. But I think that this next round of I think 22 will be in a very important year for constituents to speak up and to make their beliefs known on this issue, because that could be the trendsetter for where we go from here. But it does feel like there's a little bit of holding on to old beliefs. And I do admire the focus on the criminal justice aspects of reform in the legalization efforts, and I think that's really important. But I also just think that we have to take things one bite at a time, and banking would have been one of them. And to your point earlier, it would have been really helpful in many, many ways, especially and most specifically to small businesses and to social equity applicants. The other big thing I'm concerned about, I would say, there have been some challenges at the Supreme Court level that have been brought forward in trying to get it to the Supreme Court about the fact that cannabis is a Schedule I and an fully illegal substance. I don't know with this composition of the Supreme Court actually where we would net out if it actually got there now.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly one justice that enjoys beer, as he, repeatedly said during his confirmation hearing. I think that was if you took away nothing else, that Justice Kavanaugh likes beer. But it's amazing that the differences people have, people who regularly imbibe alcohol, have these totally different ideas around cannabis.
Yes.
I would think that from a legal perspective, a Schedule I drug is a drug that by definition has no medicinal value.
Right.
This cannabis was scheduled with the federal government knowing full well, first of all, scheduled for political reasons in the 70s under Richard Nixon, but was scheduled with the full knowledge of the DEA, understanding that it does have medicinal value, has been used for medicinal purposes by indigenous populations for centuries. Mm-hmm. So it was based on a lie. If I were to challenge that schedule, I would challenge it based on even the medical information that was known at the time, but certainly what has been developed since then, to say it should never be a Schedule I drug. And even if you believe that somehow it should have been initially, that no longer exists. And that's, I think, is the way to challenge that.
I couldn't agree with you more. That was wonderfully stated. Yeah.
It's just crazy. And I think people are recognizing that. And that's actually a good segue into some news items I wanted to cover. So this week, there was a headline, Pfizer in the news, right? Pfizer's always in the news, and more lately, especially with the current COVID situation. But Pfizer was in the news for cannabis. So they made some headlines because they're acquiring a company, Arena, that has a development pipeline that includes research focused on cannabinoid receptors. Now, I'm not sure, what that actually looks like, but it has something to do with like inflammation. And, from what I understand, cannabis is good for that. Anecdotally, you hear those stories and people using it for things like that. So it's interesting to see, Pfizer, making headlines around this. And I think it goes, to your point, Andrea, that it's Schedule I is a, substance that has no medicinal value. Yet here we are, Pfizer, one of the largest pharma companies in the world, looking at cannabis and cannabinoid receptors for medical purposes and making this, sizable acquisition. So it's just more data points, I think, to just show how untenable, this kind of current situation that we're in is.
Yeah, and every single state that legalized it legalized medical first, and in some states medical only still. I don't know how those two things logically coexist on a federal level.
Yeah, it's gotta change.
Andrea was making a great point in the pre-show, which is something that Morgan and I discussed way back. Like when we launched the fund, one of the first investments was GW Pharma. And, we're very big believers in not having this kind of go the way that a lot of that pharma has gone, where it becomes really expensive, really difficult to access. We want it to be widely accessible, but we also want it to be regulated and controlled so that people are sure they're getting good, well-tested product. And that's what I'm seeing good things happen on the state level. But Andrea's great point too was that, we put it in pill form. That's what they'll probably want to do, or some other form that's extremely familiar. There's not a lot of stigma or bias around it. And maybe it can get into the hands of people. It would help more easily. Like I know some folks in my life who are of a bit of a different generation and definitely have that ingrained belief system that cannabis has no redeeming qualities to it. But yet they had conditions that it would have been really helpful for. And it was really sad because I had to watch them suffer through a path of pharmacology that actually resulted in a lot of additional suffering, where if they'd been open to cannabis, maybe it could have changed their path a little bit, at least maybe on a palliative care level, which is what I'm always like arguing for. So maybe if it had come from Pfizer in a pill form, then their life would have been improved by that if it had broken through the stereotype or the stigma for them. So it is something that I just watch, but we'll just have to see what happens next. But it was a move for sure, but it wasn't just a pure cannabis company. Unlike where Jazz acquired GW, that was a pure pharma or pure cannabis play on those focused pathways. This is a bit different, but still it's definitely an above ground pointing in the direction that they're paying attention to this industry. I think all of us believe that they've been paying attention a whole lot longer than just...
Yeah, I think on the research front, absolutely. I mean, you've got colleges and universities which created offshoots because they, to not risk their federal money, created research offshoots and had their researchers that were faculty They've been doing it for years and years and years, not necessarily all for pharmaceutical companies, but you have to believe that a lot of that research has been driven by pharmaceutical companies. And I sort of, I agree with your point, Emily, and then I worry that Big Pharma is called Big Pharma for a reason. And they will, to take it away from the plant and the naturalness of the plant and create a pill, that will eliminate, it will probably end up eliminating, sort of jobs and having an impact on that. But it's just the idea that it becomes just another pharmaceutical, because for so many people it is about the plant and the naturalness of that. And I'd be very interesting to see what, if any, balance gets struck if it becomes federally legal and Big Pharma really does move in.
Yep. That's a great point.
Well, beyond medical, kind of looking back at the adult use market in California, a couple other headlines I want to touch on. These are, I think, pretty notable. The first one, Glass House, which we talk about quite a bit on this show, big super state operator, as they like to call themselves out in California there, are buying Plus Products. And Plus Products, for those not in the California market, they produce edibles primarily. And I pulled some data on Plus to kind of see where they fit in the market. Year to date, so I guess through November, full month of November, doesn't include December sales. Plus did just over 37 million in edible sales, 2.2 million units, and they're actually ranked number 4 in the market at this point. And 1, 2, and 3 go to Kiva, Wild, and Thunderstorm, so they're right there, top 5 brands. So I think that's a good get for Glass House. I think Glass House, makes a lot of headlines for their flower for good reason. I think they've got great reputation, good growers there, obviously, that we know, Graham so passionate about cannabis, and I think that carries through the brand. And they've got the largest greenhouse, I believe second largest greenhouse in the US, in the world. Some incredible stat like that, here in California, but they don't really have much in the way of like beyond flower, right? Or flower-based products. I think they have some pre-rolls, some flowers. So this gives them an opportunity to kind of move into different categories, which is, I think, part of the game right now as everyone's looking to scale up and capture the opportunity here in California. And as they say, then, potentially moving from here into other markets, like maybe New York in the future. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Anything,
Yeah.
Emily, I know you familiar with Plus?
Yeah, definitely familiar with Plus. Actually really love Jake, the founder. I think he was, kind of ahead of his time on narrowing in on the gummy category. He started off actually with gum. Little fact about it. And I thought that was a pretty cool way to think about it, just like because of the way it gets absorbed on your tongue. Anyway, whole sidebar, but the gummy thing, they definitely were leading the way in that. They had the tins. It was a great trajectory for the business. And then I think it just got really competitive because we know it's one of the fastest growing and most interesting categories in lots of ways. And you have the strong competitors of Kiva with the Camino. You have Wild gummies, and you have Wana. Like, those are a pretty formidable big set of competitors in that space. Not to mention that a lot of the operators have their own gummy brands on the shelf as well. So it's a great aspect of the market, and you have the data right in front of you, I'm sure, about the size of gummies, but it is a growing and interesting subsector of edibles, and it blows other edible categories out of the water in terms of the growth and traction of it. But I think that it's an interesting move. It's a known brand. I knew Plus was kind of looking for a home for a bit. I was just reading Matt McGinley, one of our, our favorite analysts, and he's been on the show. He was writing about 12 things to keep an eye on for 2022. And one of his big points is that this market's still, it's due for consolidation. It's due for M&A because there's a lot of different companies, and it's so fragmented and difficult to run in this industry. So being able to come together and creating kind of the synergies and leveraging infrastructure can only be beneficial. And I think being a brand, especially in California, would be good. And let's face it, in a greenhouse that size, they're growing a ton of active ingredient being the cannabinoids. And so they can definitely power that on the back end.
Yeah, great point about the gummies. I mean, it is like the edible category should just be called the gummy category at this point. It's so
Yeah.
large. But yeah, their top product is their Uplift Sour Watermelon, which does 16% of their product sales. So I think, they've got a handful of these that are kind of tagged around uplift or relax, and those seem to do really well for them. It'll be interesting to see if Glass House keeps the brand in the same way, or if they try something different, kind of bring some of the Glass House DNA to it. But anyways, I think a great deal for both. I think Glass House probably a great home for Plus, and Plus is a great brand for Glass House. So pretty cool to see. And then last on the headlines, also California, but in many ways Nevada, Planet 13, which is the largest store in Las Vegas, just does outsized revenues for like a single store operator in that market and a single store operator in the California market with their Orange County location. Made headlines. They acquired Next Green Wave Holdings for $91 million in stock, which at the top of the recording here, we're talking about Next Green Wave. Is an interesting name because I feel like we're in the green wave, but maybe there was a previous green wave that was out there. But the headline that I think this headline is interesting because Next Green Wave, as far as I understand them, does what they say, seed to shelf craft cannabis producer offering products through its in-house brand portfolio and wholesale flower, which makes me think that now we're going to see Planet 13 becoming that vertically integrated, maybe introducing CPG like brands to the market, which they don't do currently. I had privilege of going to their store in Orange County just a month or two ago, and it's pretty impressive, the size and the scale. But what's really unique is they do stores within a store. So it's kind of like going into a Best Buy and you see like an Apple area. So the same thing, you go into, yeah, right. You go into Planet 13 and you see Select brand or you see Stizzy kind of have their own area within. And so it'll be interesting to see if they are trying to make their own brands, what that looks like. And I'm always really interested in, Andrea, I mean, with Ascend, you guys are close to this. I know, you're bringing brands over to Ascend, but as you have these homegrown brands and you distribute them, internally, but also externally, that kind of push-pull dynamic with these other brands that you're kind of working with, but competing against at the same time. It's a real fascinating piece of our industry right now, I think. But it's just more moves. I think everyone's trying to capture the opportunity here, particularly in California with these latest two headlines, although Planet 13 is in a big way in Las Vegas, but I think, they're very much looking at the California market for their growth right now.
Yeah. It was funny. The day before that, I was 4.5 hours delayed at the airport in Miami doing laps. And Morgan and I were talking about Planet 13, and we were like, we think either someone's going to buy them or they're going to buy someone. And their stock has been trading at a premium when you look at the multiples compared to, a premium. It's still, everything's so depressed in this industry on the public market side, but it was trading at a premium on a multiples basis. And he made the great point. He was like, they should buy someone with stock given the position they have in the market right now. And then boom, like seriously, 48 hours later came this announcement. And I think, the fact that they opened, they definitely have been just crushing it in Las Vegas, and then opening the big, store in Santa Ana. Now you're in California, and it really hurts if you're not vertical in this state. So I think it was a smart move on their part, and they did well. They used stock, and so they can just go ahead and start backfilling. And then you just have to play that interesting pricing and shelf game of where you sit as a private label brand and still, want to attract the keystone brands that you were just mentioning to your store, so that you still attract the consumers to your store, but maybe you grab them at a different level and you get a nice hit to or a nice benefit to your gross margin profile. So I know in Ascend, at the Friend Street store, we do pop-ups in the store, right? Capsules.
Yeah. In fact, we just had Edie Parker. We just did an Edie Parker pop-up that was very successful. But it is a really great point that, cannabis being cannabis, when it's, starts out state by state and everyone is working together and everyone's sort of interdependent. And then as things grow larger, that's a really significant question, is at what point do you become competitors while still trying to offer the most diverse and widest menu to your customers? And and I think those will be some of the growing pains state by state that everybody sort of experiences. But Planet 13 and California are in a whole different category, because California is like its own country, and Planet 13 is sort of like its own cannabis industry to some degree. So it's kind of a good marriage there.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it'll be interesting to see how this sets them up for next year. I think it's a great place to wrap it up. Andrea, thank you so much for all your insight, for joining us today. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find us in Massachusetts. You can just go to letsascend.com. But you can find us in Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, New Jersey. Who am I leaving out? Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, New Jersey, Massachusetts. I think that's everybody.
New York.
And hopefully soon in a few other places.
Fantastic. And for all listeners, encourage you guys to head over to Headset. We've got a recent industry report that you can take a look at, really examining industry slowdown, or what appears to be slowdown in certain markets, kind of doing a deep dive there. I think it's pretty unique, and a lot of people are asking us about, what's going on. And markets like Massachusetts, as we're covering, are growing nicely, while some, like Washington State, have contracted a little bit. But it's a lot on, like, what did 2020 look like? Compared to this year. And 2020 was a unique year with COVID and some accelerant that we saw because of that, and kind of how does that play out in growth this year, and so on. So I encourage everyone to check that out. You can find that at headset.io. Otherwise, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, please be sure you subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast networks. It's very helpful, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.